Hello, I'm Corey Hello, and welcome to another episode of Critimation, where I review animated TV shows and films. As always, I do not own any of these films or shows. They are properties of their respected owners. Paw and Order, which is an episode from the New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. The episode begins with the characters performing a play hosted by Christopher Robin. The play is called The Legend of Sheriff Piglet. When the main cast, consisting of Pooh, Tigger, Piglet, Rabbit, and Eeyore, arrive at a western town, only to find the inhabitants of prairie dogs leaving because Nasty Jack and his gang are arriving. And to make matters worse, Piglet is named the new sheriff. After Piglet is threatened by Nasty Jack, Rabbit is forced to serve root beers and banana splits at the saloon, and a failed rescue attempt by Tigger leaves him all tied up. Literally. Thankfully, Pooh shows up in a Lone Ranger-like role, and Jack and Pooh start shooting at each other with ice cream scoops, as guns were not allowed on the show. Jack is defeated and decides to set a trap for Pooh, which results in him and his steed Eeyore getting captured. Jack then challenges Piglet to a showdown at sundown, and while reluctant, Piglet realizes that he must, for the sake of the town. Thankfully, Pooh and Eeyore manage to escape and arrive by minecart, but they miss Jack entirely. And just as Piglet is about to get a beating, his badge comes off, meaning that he is no longer sheriff. This frustrates Jack because he can no longer have a grudge against Piglet. Piglet then takes pity on Jack and decides to make him sheriff. Jack reforms and then turns against his own gang, stating that he's going to maintain the law of the town. The episode ends with Piglet being rewarded for saving the town, and Pooh and Eeyore once again spoofing the Lone Ranger, riding off into the opposite direction of the sunset. While it was kind of weird to see the characters outside the 100-acre wood, I thought this episode was a nice tribute to the Western genre, and I absolutely loved how Owl and Gopher served as narrators doing their dialogue and song. As a matter of fact, I think the episode is popular enough that the Japanese Disney store is using merchandise based on this episode for the Winnie the Pooh characters as of 2021, which is all the better reason to check out this episode, which I would totally recommend. Drip Along Daffy, directed by Chuck Jones. After the sheriff is shot in a lawless western town, Daffy decides to take over as the new sheriff. After walking into a bar, western style, and ordering a drink, he meets the outlaw Nasty Canasty, who makes Daffy drink his usual choice of beverage, which is humorously made up of several poisons. Probably a play on the words, "What's your poison?" After exhibiting some side effects, Daffy challenges Nasty to a duel. After some very cleverly placed camera angles to show the duel from different shots, Daffy's sidekick Porky Pig sicks a toy soldier on Nasty, which surprisingly shoots him. Porky is then hailed a hero and is made the new sheriff, much to Daffy's disappointment. Thankfully, he still gets to clean up the one-horse town, in a literal sense. The cartoon was a turning point for Daffy because in the past he had been portrayed as a screwball. After the success of Chuck Jones's Hunter trilogy, Daffy was transformed into a narcissistic spotlight-seeking duck with bad luck. who, unlike Bugs Bunny, who would have been able to take on Canasti no problem, Daffy is definitely out of his league with this guy. In addition, Porky Pig gets a different dynamic with Daffy. In the past, they were enemies. Starting here, Porky would become Daffy's loyal sidekick, often billed as the comic relief, even though he's way more competent. This dynamic would continue throughout Chuck Jones's career with shorts such as Duck Dodgers and Deuce You Say. The main reason I would recommend this short is not just because it was a turnaround for the characters, but also because it was a parody of the Western genre itself. Not only is there an obvious reference to the Lone Ranger, but Porky's opening song is a parody of the sentimental cowboy songs. The song itself references Gourd Gulch, which is the nickname of an intersection where old Western stars would hang out in Hollywood. And while it was definitely testing grounds of what would come for Daffy Duck, I think this is definitely a must-watch for any Looney Tune fan. Haviardo. The episode begins with the kids playing Western Town. This is made possible by Richie Rich, who rented out equipment, in contrast to how they usually use their imaginations. After saving Doc Cliche from being run over by a train, Sheriff Dodd is warned by Prospector Tiny that the Stico Bandidos are coming to town. After interviewing several characters at a local saloon, they find out that the snake oil salesman Bobby has been selling beans for the Bandidos to use to power their stink bombs. They also learn that the Bandidos are planning to rob an ice cream train. But when Dot arrives to stop them, she is forced to use some of her own stink bombs supplied by Audrey. But in the process, she ruins the ice cream. As a result, Dot has to turn in her badge and leave town. But she later gets a chance to redeem herself after learning that the Bandidos have taken over the town. She then challenges the Bandidos' leader, Melvin, or Melly the Kid in this case, to a duel, and she wins by shooting a rubber band at his stink bomb. One of the things that really struck me about this episode is not only how it was able to make fun of Western cliches, such as mining for gold, and references to famous Western outlaws, but during the showdown sequence, they were able to make use of non-lethal weapons, such as rubber bands and stink bombs, replacing the overused gun violence in Western films. And even though it's based on a kid's imagination, I still give props to the writers for coming up with a creative solution to get past the censors while still keeping true to the overall feel to the Western genre. And I would recommend this to anyone who likes Westerns but doesn't care for the problematic context that comes with them. In American Tale, Feivel Goes West. The film takes place 5 years after the events of the original film. At this point, the Masquerades have discovered that the American dream isn't all that it's cracked up to be. And to make matters worse, they are forced underground by a group of cats who attack the mouse community. There they meet a cowboy mouse, which is really a puppet being controlled by the cat's leader, Catterwall, who tells them that there's a new American dream out west, thereby convincing the mice, including the Masquerades, to take a train out to a western town called Green River. After traveling for some time, Feivel discovers Catterwall's plan to trick the mice into being their friends and then have them create a balloon, after which they would be turned into mouse burgers by a giant mouse trap. However, Feivel gets discovered and is thrown off the train by Catterwall's assistant, Artrula the tarantula. While he survived, Feivel has to walk the rest of the way to Green River. Along the way, he gets captured by a hawk. Meanwhile, the cat that Feivel befriended in the first film, Tigger, had been following the train for some time and gets lost. Eventually, he gets captured by Native American mice and is made their god, Nuff said. And it is here that these mice shoot down the hawk carrying Feivel and he is reunited with Tigger. After riding a tumbleweed the rest of the way to Green River, Feivel tries to warn his family about the cat's plan, but no one believes him. Meanwhile, Catawba notices Tanya singing and decides to make her a saloon girl. After some consulting from Miss Kitty, a former girlfriend of Tiger who had left to go west, Tanya becomes a hit in the saloon, and she too ignores Fiver's warnings. That night, Fiver meets an old dog who is revealed to be his idol, Wiley Burp. He offers to help Fiver out in saving the other mice in exchange for getting a dog to train as his apprentice. And since Fiver doesn't know any other dogs, he recruits Tiger instead. After a surprisingly impressive training montage, Tiger becomes a pretty believable dog. The trio arrive just in time to stop Catawba from cutting the ribbon that would activate the mousetrap, and a showdown begins. Eventually, Catawba starts using the nearby rifle as a cannon to shoot mice, but is intercepted by Fievel. However, Chula takes Miss Kitty hostage. After Tiger deals with the other cats and rescues her, Fievel uses the rifle to shoot the ribbon to the mousetrap and catapult the cats into a mailbag that is picked up by the train. With the cats gone, everyone celebrates. Tanya gives up her career as a singer, Miss Kitty falls for Tiger, and Fievel begins to notice Wiley walking into the sunset and follows him. After stopping to rest, Wiley hands Fievel a sheriff badge, signifying his retirement, and tells him that even though the battle is won, Fievel's journey is far from over. While this movie is far from what Don Bluth's classic film was, being more comical than its predecessor, I do think that the film does have its own strengths and weaknesses. The film does tend to get ahead of itself a bit too often, and has a lack of focus with three contrasting plots. The journey to go west, Tanya wanting to be a singer, and Tiger following the train. The acting is very good, especially John Cleese's performance as Cattle War. But I feel like the characterizations are a bit too predictable. You're gonna know who's the villain and who's the good guy here. Its biggest weakness, however, is the fact that there's a bunch of missing context to what's going on, such as 50 being obsessed with the Wild West. I feel like there could have been a whole nother film to explain a lot of the plot points in this movie. One of the film's biggest strengths, however, is the use of camera movement, such as the scene where Five was being carried by the hawk. There is also a bunch of shots with impressive lighting effects. Honestly, despite being an early sequel, as it falls flat from what we have nowadays, where studios are careful to make sure that the sequel is actually worth seeing, rather than just being a cash grab. It definitely tries to be more creatively bolder than its predecessor, even though the emotional punch of the original is not present. Plus, we have James Stewart, the star of It's a Wonderful Life, in his final role, which makes the dialogue of his character, Wiley Bub, at the end of the movie a lot more meaningful as he's passing the torch down to a new generation of actors. At least that's how I interpreted it. I do want to point out that the film is full of Western tropes. Not just the music, but a bunch of other cliches that could make the plot a bit more outdated by today's standards. This includes gun violence, especially in the opening sequence, saloon girls that may come across as sexist, and of course, the offensive depiction of indigenous tribes. In this case, they are depicted as savage, bloodthirsty warmongers who live in teepees or sotik, meaning that they don't convey much emotion other than looking serious. and they are superstitious as they mistake Tigger for a god based on a mountainside that resides near their village. All in all, I think this movie is worth a watch. Just be aware that there is some material that probably wouldn't fly on today's market. In short, I would recommend this film to those who are into early sequels that were in theaters, but not to those who are fans of the original American Tale. The Wild Wild West. The episode begins with Grandpa Stu telling the babies Western stories. Meanwhile, Angelica finds some left behind coupons for free ice cream lying on the ground and decides to keep them for herself. This leads to her being chased by Tommy, Chucky, and Susie while pretending they're in the Wild West. During the chase, the trio find Bill and Lil taking on the persona of Native Americans who help them across a river using a canoe. They also chase Angelica through some woods, up a mountain, into Angelica's hideout, but get caught. Thankfully, Phil and Lil arrive with backup, and they convince Angelica to apologize and share the coupons with everyone. While I do criticize the fact that they chose to use Caucasian characters as the Native Americans, I do like one comment that was made in the episode. Chucky thinks that the Native Americans might be scary, but Tommy reassures him that they're friends. I think this shows that indigenous people should not be feared but instead befriended. My biggest takeaway from this episode, however, is how they were able to balance make believe with the real world, as it constantly switches back and forth between how the babies are imagining their adventure with what's actually happening. And I would recommend this episode to those who are fans of that kind of stuff, where you get to see what's going on inside the character's head, while also getting to see what's actually happening. Just be aware that while this is an improvement over An American Tale Feivel Goes West, the fact that they chose Caucasian characters to play indigenous characters in this scenario probably wouldn't be seen as okay on today's market. Odd, Odd West. The episode begins with Timmy and the Squirrely Scouts being led by his dad, going to his childhood place, Dimsdale Flats, an old western town that has been long abandoned. No sooner do they arrive, however, they see that Doug Dimmadome, founder and owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome, wants to bulldoze the town and build a mini mall over it on account of the deed being lost to time. But despite standing up for Timmy's dad, as it states in the manual that the scouts need to stand up for their scoutmaster, Doug throws them all in jail. And because Cosmo and Wanda cannot wish up the deed, Timmy decides to go to the Old West to look for it. Shortly after encountering the ancestors of Timmy's friends Chester and AJ, they learn that the local criminal, Vicky the Kid, who happens to be Vicky's ancestor, has the deed to the town. In order to retrieve it, Timmy takes on the persona of the Masked Stranger, which is obviously a parody of the Lone Ranger. To complete the reference, Wanda takes on the persona of the Native American sidekick Dancing with Wands, which is not only a reference to the film Dances with Wolves, but the role she takes on is a reference to Tonto, which, unfortunately, the name translates to dumb. And finally, there's the trusty steed, Cosmo. Get it? Because he's a cow? Anyway, what commences is what could be perhaps the most epic duel of rock, paper, scissors. And with Timmy's mad skills and a little help from Wanda, he obtains the deed from Vicky the Kid. After returning to the present and finding out that the scouts had managed to dig themselves out of prison, Timmy reveals that he hid the deed in an old manual. And since nobody reads the manual anymore, even at that time, it explains why no one was able to find it. Timmy then gives the deed to his dad, making him the owner of the town. But Doug is able to bribe him out of it. However, the sad ending becomes more bittersweet as Timmy is given an Make My Dad Richer badge. It's really a shelf badge with the word shelf crossed off. But it's the thought that counts, I guess. While I did think this was a pretty good episode, I do want to point out that in addition to what was stated before about Wanda's Tonto-like character in The Lone Ranger, like the Rugrats episode we discussed earlier, it involves a Caucasian character pretending to be a race that he or she is not. This kind of writing for a show would not be acceptable in today's market for sure. It was wrong then and it's still wrong today. It actually surprises me that recently the Nickelodeon YouTube channel was able to put this episode on without any problems. So if you do decide to watch this episode, which I probably would not fully recommend, just be aware that some of the jokes would not fly in today's atmosphere. Good Little Bad Guy. The show involves an outlaw named Daddy Mumbleweed trying to teach his son to be an outlaw. But as the title suggests, his son is a goody two shoes of a person. Father decides to teach his son how to hold up a train, but someone had tipped them off to Sheriff Ricochet Rabbit and his trusty deputy Droopalong, who proceed to stop them at the train, during which Ricochet uses one of his famous trick bullets to give Daddy Mumbleweed a hot foot. Next, Daddy tries to teach his son to rob a bank, but he accidentally uses a water squirter. And once again, Ricochet's there to stop him, and uses one of his bullets to trick him out of a stovepipe he's hiding in. Finally, Paw tries to teach his son to rob a stagecoach, but once again, Ricochet is there to stop him, and he gets flattened, quite literally. After being arrested, it is revealed that Mumbleweed's son was the contact who kept tipping them off. Ricochet then mentions that he'll let the son out for good behavior, and the cartoon ends. Well, I didn't see anything special about this particular cartoon. I did like how they used the rule of thirds method as part of the plot. The Mumbleweeds tried to do 3 robberies before being arrested. Also, the ending was kinda cute. For those who are into more retro parodies of the Western genre, this is something that I would recommend. The Outlaw Scrooge McDuck. The episode begins with Louie becoming discouraged about the whole Louie Incorporated thing that had been going on during the second season of which this episode takes place. So Scrooge tells him about a time he was in the Old West, in a town called Gumption. During that time, Scrooge was prospecting for gold, but he gets competition from his old rival Goldie. But things get even worse that when they do find a giant gold nugget, it is claimed by none other than the town's owner, John D. Rockerduck. And while Goldie pins him against Scrooge and tries to get away with the gold, she is stopped by Jeeves, John's butler slash bodyguard. The sheriff, who happens to be fetching Crackshell's ancestor, then throws them in jail, where they meet a time-traveling Gyro Gearloose, who reveals that Rockerduck was nothing but a con man. After being let out by the sheriff, Before catch up to the train Rockaduck is on using rocket horses made by Gyro. While Goldie makes a distraction, Scrooge snags the keys from Rockaduck's belt, allowing him to access the mine cart where the gold nugget is, only to be cornered by Jeeves. Thankfully, Goldie returns, along with the sheriff in a Gizmo Duck-like suit as backup. But as the group escape, the Gizmo Duck suit overheats and explodes off the bridge, taking the gold with it. But as luck would have it, the pieces of gold from the explosion went downriver and back into the town, creating a gold reservoir. After finishing his story, Scrooge then tells Louis that he needs to decide what kind of way he needs to make his fortune. But before he could answer, Gyro manages to get back to the present through the use of his bathtub-shaped time machine. The episode ends with Louis calling Goldie and asks if she wants to be his partner for Louis Incorporated, setting up the stage for the next episode in the arc. Now, aside from the backgrounds, which are clearly inspired by Maurice Noble's designs from the Wile E. Coyote cartoons of Warner Brothers, I have to give props to the team who designed the rocket horses as well as the Western Gizmo Duck suit. And I liked how they used Gyro rather than an ancestor of him like Ratchet Gearloose from the comics. But most notably, I was surprised that they incorporated John D. Rockaduck, who was a character that wasn't very well known in the States, as most of his stories were made by Italian writers. Traditionally portrayed as the third richest duck in the world, John D. Rockaduck has the morality of spending money to show his wealth. As the phrase goes, you have to spend money to make money, which makes him a natural enemy of Scrooge. And unlike this episode, Rockaduck hails from England, which makes sense considering most of his comics were made for the European market. But Rockaduck's biggest trait is that he tends to comment on the faults Scrooge has and vice versa, which leads to them bickering a lot. And while this animated take on Rockaduck was enjoyable, I especially liked how they gave him a white suit, which is impractical in the Wild West. The only complaint I had is that they left out a key trait of the character from the comics. Whenever he's humiliated or defeated, he literally eats his hat. But nonetheless, I would recommend this episode to anyone who loves westerns but would like them to pretty much play with the old cliches and make something new out of them. The good, the bad, the Tigger. The episode starts with the gang playing with Christopher Robin's toy train. Before going to lunch, Christopher Robin tells the others not to touch the train while he's gone. Unfortunately, Tigger decides to borrow the train regardless and starts it up again. After Robin and Piglet find out, we are then brought into a fantasy where everyone's in a Western setting. In this fantasy, Pooh and Tigger are portrayed as train robbers, and Sheriff Piglet has to bring them in, along with the help of Rabbit and Eeyore, who is portrayed as wearing a sombrero for some reason. I guess the writers were fans of Crick-Graw McGraw's sidekick, Bubba Louie. Anyway, after a few failed attempts, the three decide to chase after the train using a handcart, but soon lose control and even pick up Gopher in an old miner's outfit as a stowaway. Meanwhile, Tigger is desperately trying to stop the train but gets hooked up on a mail hook. With Pooh by himself, the train then crashes into the handcart, and everyone flies up into the air and lands on each other, while the train itself is in pieces. Pooh is then arrested for train napping, much to Piglet's disappointment, and is to be sentenced to a swing-in the next day. Of course, in order to keep the show kid-friendly, they mean it literally. They have to have him swing on a tire swing. That night, Tigger sneaks in and breaks Pooh out of prison, and they go on a lam. They then decide to fix up the train to the best of their ability in hopes that they wouldn't have to turn themselves in. But the train rolls away and the two get arrested. During which Tigger confesses that he was the mastermind behind the train robbery and Pooh was innocent. The train then reappears out of control and Piglet is captured by it. In order to rescue him, Tigger paid some train tracks around town for the train to follow in the hopes that it would eventually run out of steam. But after waiting for 2 weeks, they just decide to use a banana peel to stop it. After Tigger apologizes for all the trouble, Piglet decides to let him off with a warning. After returning to reality, Christopher Robin returns and offers to let Tigger control the train, which he refuses, showing that he has truly learned his lesson, and ending the cartoon. Having grown up with this episode on VHS, I think this is a good example of teaching kids how to ask before borrowing. And like Pooh's other Western adventure, Paw and Order, it acknowledges the fact that it's a fantasy and not reality. My only real complaint is that they tried to put Gopher in two different roles. The prospect of cameos throughout the episode, and the role of the judge, which I found to be a little bit confusing when I was a kid. Nonetheless, I would recommend this to anyone who's a fan of the 90s Winnie the Pooh show. Thanks for tuning in to Critimation. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And follow me on Blue Sky. Or support me on Patreon. I'm open to suggestions, and I will see you next time.